Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and guess what? No sound. And now we're back with sound. I love doing this. It's like it gives me a means of testing the ping, basically. I'll come out on the show. I will intentionally leave the sound off. I'll start talking as if I was really talking, mostly just moving my lips. And then I wait to see how long it takes for people to tell me that the sound isn't on, and that gives me an idea of how much ping we're getting here. And turns out it's about, I don't know, 7 or 8 seconds, something like that. I am looking at the comment section here after a late start, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and I am hearing people talking about BPS for Black Pigeon Speaks. It's a YouTuber apparently. Here I am new to this whole story. YouTuber got banned, I guess, or demonetized. Is he a black conservative? Can somebody tell me? I haven't heard of the channel. Or is he just a fan of black pigeons? Hard to say, really, at this point. I'll wait for the 8-second ping, and then it'll come up, and I'll tell you what some of the stuff we've been working on. And we will also cover a couple of things, and we'll look at some potential. He's not. Okay. His channel disappeared. Canadian living in Japan, banned. Okay. Was he 489,000 subscribers? Yeah. Okay, so there was a big stink about this, needless to say. Did they reinstate him? And again, we wait for the ping. Wow, it's... Okay, backlash, channel's back. Retired Navy lives in Japan. Okay. Reinstated 30 minutes ago. So there's hope for the country, folks. That's what that means. That means there's hope for the country. And it also means, and this is important, it also means that not only is there hope for the country, but it also means that there is a threshold of outrage that YouTube is not willing to cross. And so that's also exceedingly good news for people like me, and should be good news for people like you who like listening to these messages on account of you being free people and all. And so that is very, very interesting news. Joseph Talbot says every time it's a test, we have to backlash every time. Exactly. Steve Crowder being demonetized. I don't think that's been reversed. I haven't heard that it has been, but Crowder has enough views so that his revenue is significant. That would be a significant hit for him. I heard that the Trump administration was going after Facebook. I guess the Attorney General needs to be looking into this, and he needs to be looking into it while he's still the Attorney General. I'm feeling pretty good about 2020, but honest to God, this you need to get in there and get this done now, and you need to threaten them with monopoly regulations, which they essentially are, and you need to get in there real quick and do it while we still have the ability to appoint the Attorney General. Like I say, I feel pretty good about 2020, but you never know. Somebody told me that BillWhittle.com just gave them a gateway error. I don't know if you can clear your cache. I don't even know what that really. I mean, I know what it means, but I don't really know how to tell you how to do it. But I haven't heard anything else going on, but mostly it's working. So anyway, that news came in just as we started rolling. So it took me a while to cut up for that. Started pretty late today, about 15 minutes behind schedule. The reason is because I cannot go into the details of it yet, but I can probably just tell you that I am working on a major production for the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, coming up on July 20th of 2019. It'll be 50 years ago. And we're doing a major 3 or 4 hour deal. So I was writing that, and I was trying to explain at the particular point when the show started I was trying to explain to people what was going on, because everybody remembers the moon. They just cheat a little bit, but everybody remembers the moon landing, and what they remember if they saw the moon landing is they remember Neil on the ladder and putting his foot down on the moon and then bouncing around and the flag and the salute and all that other stuff. But what very few people remember is the actual landing, and what I didn't remember until I saw in researching this, until I went back and watched the CBS News coverage. I don't know how many of you remember this, for the subset of you that actually saw the moon landing. But if you're watching CBS News, and 600 million people were around the world, there were 200 million Americans at the time, anybody who had a TV set was watching. What happened, and I didn't realize this again, I certainly didn't realize it at the time, I didn't realize it until just a few weeks ago. But if you look at the CBS animation, you get to watch a cartoon LEM and a big jet of flame coming out of it too, and it's flying sideways and down, and then eventually they shift to another, animation. It's like it's a drawing. Now you're looking down on the surface of the moon, and the first of the footpads is just cruising, and then you see craters underneath, and then you see the thing kind of landing in the distance, and then right on schedule, you see a plastic model LEM on a plaster moon, and there's rocks in the foregrounds, and there it is, the LEM is sitting on the moon. Only the problem is that the audio, which is coming in live, or second late coming from the moon, they're not saying, hey, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. The animation is showing them on the moon. But Houston, first thing that he says after you see them on the moon is you hear 60 seconds. And you just hear Buzz calling out these numbers. And for 40 seconds, I timed it almost exactly, for 40 seconds after CBS animation and everybody in the world had a picture of a fake LEM on the fake moon, I'll put it up. I'll put it up in the links right now here for the people watching live. Maybe I can do it for YouTubers as well, if I can remember. Hang on a second. You put it up here. Put it in the comment section. It's really awesome. It's really, really good. Okay, copy that. Yep. Hang on. But what nobody realized was that even though you're putting it up in the chat room, and I'll try to remember to put it up on YouTube. What nobody realized was that we were all seeing a toy lunar module on a toy moon, and they were still, I don't know, 60 stories in the air, 600 feet, something like that. Needless to say, I'm doing a check to get all the numbers and figures right. But what I'm trying to explain to people, at least when I was writing this particular bit, because we were talking about the whole space program, but as they were coming in, the initial stage of the descent, they're doing the descent burn. They're slowing down. The LEM is in such a position that that they're looking at the moon over their heads, and the moon is scrolling by. The thing's almost sideways. And as they're slowing down and slowly descending, they're watching these lunar features come by. And one of the lunar features on Apollo 11 was a tiny little ridge called Boot Hill, tiny little thing. And as this feature's coming along, they say, okay, I see it, that's Boot Hill, and they're watching it. And then it crosses a mark, a little inscribed mark on the windshield. And the second that thing crosses that mark, Armstrong makes note of the time. And it turns out that Boot Hill is crossing that mark sooner than they thought, which means they're going faster than they thought, which means they're going to go longer than they thought. But they did not know. They knew they were going to land long. They knew they were going to land long 8 minutes before they landed. But they didn't know what... I sent the wrong link. I'm sorry. Hang on a second. Here's the link. Hang on a second. I put the wrong link there. I put the actual landing link. This is the animation link. It's so cool to see. Hang on a sec. Here it comes. Where'd you go? Here it comes. Here's the actual CBS News rebroadcast. They're basically fighting for their lives. They're certainly fighting for the mission. Because they landed long, they're going to land in a boulder field. Armstrong said large-sized boulders. Other people described it the size of cars or small houses. And again, that's great because doing the research for this, I find myself picking up little bits and pieces that I didn't know. And I'll just walk you through a little tiny bit of this. We won't go too much further into it. We'll save it for mid-July. But I knew that the lunar module. This is something that I needed to explain because most of the people who are going to be watching this didn't watch the moon landing, didn't live through the space age. So I knew that the lunar module was so fragile that if you were to take the lunar module, a flying lunar module, and put it on the floor of the Air and Space Museum, that the second you let it off the crane, the thing would just collapse to the ground. The legs couldn't support the weight of the lunar module in 1g Earth gravity. The LEM was so fragile and so light that it only could stand on its own legs in 1/6 gravity. Most people don't know that the outer skin you see on the upper part of the LEM, just the metallic sides just right next to the windows and stuff, is about as thick as heavy-duty aluminum foil. Aluminum foil is what it's made out of, essentially. They're standing on a 2-inch honeycomb deck, but the skin is about as thick as aluminum foil, heavy-duty aluminum foil. Not that it makes much difference from light-duty aluminum foil. It's a fraction of an inch thick. And reason it's so thin is they have to save all the weight they can. The weight of the ascent stage has to be carried off the Earth into orbit, sent to the moon, decelerated, landed, and then go back up again. So every single pound counts. So the LEM was not pressurized to sea level like the Russians did. The Russians flew missions at 1 atmosphere with air. And the Americans, I think, a much smarter decision, flew much lower pressures. In the case of the LEM, it was pressurized to about 1/6 of atmospheric pressure, about 5 psi, pure oxygen. So even though they were getting very little volume, the little volume they were getting was all oxygen. So it's been fun doing the research and talking about some of the things, because I took a look at what some of the maximum drop heights were. So here's some things that I didn't know until an hour ago. First of all, there is a lunar module in the Air and Space Museum, and it is an actual piece of hardware. It's not a reconstruction. The landing gear had to be beefed up, obviously, but at the Air and Space Museum is LEM number 2. LEM number 1 flew on Apollo 5, which is a mission I never even heard of, to be honest with you, because Apollo 7 was the first manned mission, but I should have known there'd be Apollo 5 because there were Saturn V launches and so on. So Apollo 5 was an unmanned mission in Earth orbit, and they took the LEM up, and the LEM performed at least as well in the initial testings on Apollo 5 as it could have done, so they decided to skip sending the number 2 LEM up, and they just went right on with it to Apollo 9. So it's an actual LEM, but it is beefed up to withstand its own weight. And I didn't know about that being LM number 2. I knew the skin was thick. I didn't know how lightly pressurized it was. But what I also didn't know were two things. I didn't know what the actual height was that you could cut the engine and survive it. And I also didn't know about Apollo 15. I mean, I knew about Apollo 15, but I didn't know what I'm about to relate about Apollo 15. So in other words, trying to, is that right, Rubber City Rebel? Anyway, just somebody just said, got a comment there that said Oberlin College loses punitive phase of a defamation case, and they owe Gibson's Bakery $33 million now. That's just too much. I can't believe that's true. Oh, awesome. Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of commies. Sweet. That's just excellent. Great. So you don't have to bake the cake. Turns out it is a turns out it's a pretty good day for freedom here as we're recording this. Anyway, back to the story. So I'm trying to explain to people that while we are watching the plastic lem on the plaster moon, these guys are out there fighting for their lives. And I didn't realize how narrow the tolerances are. Apollo 15, as it turned out, Hadley Rill, wasn't it? Yeah. Hadley Rill, Frau Mauro of 16, was it? And Taurus Littrow for 17. Anyway, Apollo 15 is landing. And as Dave Scott's bringing the LEM down, he's doing a beautiful job. He's got all the time in the world compared to Neil and Buzz. Just got tons and tons of fuel. He's coming down real slowly. He actually puts in a little bit too much thrust, and he starts going up again. And he starts coming down to land. He's got a nice clear field. Everything's great. And what I just discovered was one of the probes on the feet. 3 of the foot pads of the LEM have these probes. They're about 2 feet long. And one of them makes contact. He gets the contact light, which means it's touched the lunar surface. So the second he gets the contact light, he cuts the engine. But since he just had sort of, the contact light had hit the lip of a crater, it just kind of nudged the lip of a crater. So the LEM hits here. It's still considerably higher than it should be. He hits the kill switch. The LEM then just goes and crashes down hard enough for Irwin to go BAM! Turns out that the LEM fell a whole 1.5 feet, less than 2 feet, and it was enough to kind of knock their fillings loose. It made Irwin go BAM! You know, you could just, if you watch the landing of Apollo 15, it's like boom. And that's because the thing fell 1.5 feet. And parenthetically, landed on the side of the lip of the crater, and you can't really see it from most angles, but if you see it from an angle designed to show it, the Apollo 15 lunar module's it's really cranked. As it turns out, the Apollo 15 lunar module settled at an angle of 11 degrees off the vertical, and the limit for a safe liftoff was 12 degrees. Anything more than 12 degrees, and they did not think that there would be enough thruster authority to get the thing vertical in time. So it's amazing how light and how small and how thin the whole thing was. Anyway, all of those facts were really cool. That's at 1/6 gravity, as Mobile Moto points out. It fell 1.5 feet at 1/6 gravity, and that damn near broke the LEM. So I'm trying to figure a way to explain to people that if you run out of fuel, it's not like, okay, we'll just, crunch down. I forget what the exact number is, but I basically said, if you shut off that engine any higher than LeBron James, the LEM's it's just gonna break. Anyway, there he is, flying this thing to a landing. And another thing I learned, I hadn't really thought about it, but so they're using this flight computer, and I learned a lot about the navigation system doing this. So as what the hell was I going to say? I just saw a comment there that it grabbed my attention. It'll come back to me. Anyway, the whole thing was just nuts. And besides, not only is he trying to find I remember. So they're on their way down, and they're kind of going butt end first to slow down, and then there's a program code. I want to say it's I think it's line 64, P64. I think it's when the LEM just pitches up. It's part of the autopilot, and now instead of it going like sideways, now it's vertical. Now they can see the surface below them, and then they just kind of land the thing. So they're in this landing mode, and they're looking out, and Neil sees this boulder field, and all of a sudden the computer goes to, are you ready for this? The computer executes instruction 66. Execute order 66. The computer goes to P66. It's a true thing, Star Wars fans. Execute order 66. And Line 66 is the line command that gives Neil Armstrong manual control over the LEM. And that stud flies that thing down. And he's flying over and he sees this boulder field, takes a manual control, does the first thing that any pilot has been trained to do when they get into kind of a serious emergency is he puts the nose down, pitches forward. And that means that instead of slowing as it's descending, now it's just plain descending. It's basically just hovering. And he's hovering, just scooting along, trying to get past this boulder field before it runs out of fuel. So it's an interesting thing, and it's an interesting thing to describe, too, because I hadn't really thought about this, but I didn't realize quite how delicate or precarious the LEM was. So, if they were within 30 seconds of fuel, they were under 30 seconds of fuel. And if he decided to hold on, there would have been, there were three options at that point, at 30 seconds. They're already down 30 seconds earlier on the cartoon mode. And so at that point, Neil Armstrong's got three possibilities. He can either abort to orbit, just we're too low on fuel, we're not going to make it, we're going to just punch the thing up and get back up to the thing, and we'll have missed the moon by 40 feet, 50 feet. That was one option. Another option was to continue and hang in there and land safely and continue the mission and go on to mission success. And the third option was to keep trying to find that landing spot, run out of fuel, and if you're higher off the ground than LeBron James is, then the LEM is going to crash, and Armstrong and Aldrin's bodies are going to be the larger pieces of debris in a debris field that spreads out all over where the flag is supposed to be. That's a sentence I was writing as I was getting ready to get this show on the road, and that is that's quite an image, and that's what good writing is it's imagery. Just think of that spot on the moon, and you think of the LEM there, and the flag, and all the instruments. And if it had been a little bit closer, and Neil had decided to ride it all the way down, just a little bit closer, that area would just be filled with debris, and you'd have a couple of white spacesuits lying there face down in the dust. Not even the romantic kind of we're stuck here and can't get off kind of thing. You crashed. But the LEM was a soap bubble. It was a silver and gold soap bubble, and it had to be very delicately handled, and he did an amazing job of it. Anyway, so that's about it for that. We're going to take a look at the firewall questions for a while, and I'm going to try and get back to writing this thing. However, and I'm not putting anybody under any pressure, but last week, as you may remember, a couple people who I see here now were having some difficulties with some medical stuff, and I just thought we would check in on our friends and make sure that that some of the people who were talking in the last episode were able to get some of the help medical help that they needed, and if they hadn't, then we got to work harder, and we'll figure out what the hell we can do about it. So hopefully everybody's doing better. Cody MacArthur Fett says no mention of Order 66 being a reference on Wikipedia. The Emperor, when he says kill all the Jedi, says execute Order 66, and that was the program code he had to enter into the landing computer to get the manual control. So I'm going to assume somebody's probably typing. I hope everybody's doing better, and I hope everybody's actually doing well.